start to this afternoon. We're going to stay with education as I turn now to Dr. Andrea Walker. Dr. Walker is a professor of psychology at Oral Roberts University. She received her master's from Southern Nazarene University and her doctorate from Oklahoma State. She is currently a member of the City of Tulsa Human Rights Commission, which is currently considering a proposal to make Tulsa a city of compassion. Please welcome Dr. Andrea Walker.
Good afternoon. I first want to just say how grateful I am to have the opportunity to share with you all today. I sort of feel like the new kid on the block in the room, and I've met a lot of new people, and it's an honor for me to be able to share with you on this issue. You can't hear.
Okay, I'm going to turn
How's that?
a little bit more, and let's go.
Hello?
I'll get a little more.
How about this? Anything? How's this? Better? Okay, I'll just continue to talk like this. And if he turns something and it starts blasting, definitely wave. All right. And there we go. Okay, how's this? You good? Okay. As an educator, I have 3 things that I want to share with you all today. A little too loud? Okay. Briefly, I want to talk about some successes that we've seen in higher education. And then I want to talk about what I perceive to be an ongoing challenge. But I want to spend most of today talking about a possible solution. And the solution not only is applicable to our educational systems, but I think Tulsa as a whole. So when I think about race relations in higher education, I do think about the many successes that we've seen in the Tulsa area in recent years. OSU comes to mind. OSU recently receiving the Higher Education Excellence in Diversity Award for 2014. And not only that, that was the 3rd year in a row that they had actually received that award. I also think of OU's diversity plan, where resources are channeled into deliberately setting up multicultural student organizations where discussion about issues of race can be had. I also think of Oral Roberts University, who also has a fantastic multicultural student organization and has recently, 2015, been named the #1 most diverse campus in the state of Oklahoma. Although several things contributed to that measure, the 2 greatest contributors were the racial ethnic diversity of the student body and of the faculty. And I'm sure there are many other examples of this across Tulsa, but I think the things that we know for sure is that we are having an impact. Things are going well. We're doing some good things in higher education, at the very least in terms of creating structurally diverse campuses. And as it should be. Institutions ought to be examples of higher education, or examples of inclusivity in higher education. That's for sure, in both teaching and research. And sadly, that has not always been the case. We could probably, all of us, think of an example where that was distinctly not the case, but at least in past years. But I would like to draw our attention to one particular group, our American Indian students, who have perhaps felt a tremendous amount of racial tension over the years, a tension that contributes to a particular sting that has generated an ongoing sense of hesitation or even caution towards our educational systems. And as evidence for this statement, I rely on research that was recently conducted in the Tulsa area with an American Indian group within the Tulsa area, shall remain nameless. And the research was intended to discover information on cultural and religious rituals across the lifespan. But what emerged was something very surprising. Initially in the interviews, many of them, there were hesitations from the participants. Even though they had decided they wanted to participate, they were concerned about some issues related to the university. And I share with you one particular quote from one of these participants as he began to recall stories that his family members had shared with him about the schools that they went to decades prior here in Oklahoma. They were not allowed to speak their language. If they spoke their language, they were forced to wash their mouths out with soap. Another participant also mentioned these schools, saying, "The American schools focused their teaching heavily on Christian values. After much effort, the teachers finally came to realize that no matter what they did, they couldn't break the spirit of our group. And so the teaching method became religious genocide. They brought in more and more Christian people to emphasize the teaching of the Bible and answering to God. They weren't realizing that it was the same God." Still, other participants were concerned about the research process itself. In the past, universities had sponsored researchers to conduct studies within the tribe, and those researchers were not necessarily from the tribe, and so some of the results were taken out of context or misinterpreted. Even though it was well-intentioned, it didn't come from a true understanding of the spirit of the tribe, and that was hurtful to them. Thankfully, we have some things in place to prevent unethical research from being conducted. Very strong systems in place in our educational systems now to directly address this, so that the participants typically are also the direct beneficiaries of the research. But by the response of these participants, I would say more improvement is needed. We need to do a little bit better. And I do think within recent years, I've watched that there have been some deliberate efforts made by our educational systems to reach the needs of our American Indian students. OSU Institute of Technology has a Muskogee Creek Studies program teaching the language, the history, the tribal government. OSU in Stillwater has the AIIP program connecting American Indian students with graduate and professional programs in psychology. That's just a couple of examples. Wow. I'm sure there are many more examples that I have left out here today because of time. But I am cautiously optimistic that we are gradually making improvements in this area, and that the hesitance that those participants shared will gradually, over time, begin to dissipate. But have we done enough to improve racial relations in higher education? Research says that not only do we need to attend to creating structurally diverse campuses, which we've done a good job in, but also we need to attend to the psychological climate of the campus. Not surprisingly at all, general subversive attitudes, even when covert, towards our racial minority students have a negative impact on them. But not only that, they have a negative impact on the entire student body. What has a positive impact on the student body? Diverse campuses, socializing across racial lines, and increased discussion about racial issues. So yes, we need structurally diverse campuses, and we've made some progress in that area, but the key here is in relating and communicating across the racial lines and across all of the other categories that we attempt to lump ourselves into as we create our social groups. It is by eliciting perceptions of similarity beyond these categories that we are able to develop greater compassion. And compassion is a particularly potent predictor of pro-social and altruistic behavior. Neither are our students nor are we limited to common religious values or racial backgrounds to elicit perceptions of similarity. All of us as humans have certain undeniable experiences in common. We all understand what it means to love. We understand what it means to be loved, hopefully, at least to some degree. We all understand the need for an autonomous existence, freedom to make our own choices. We all understand pain. We all understand disappointment. And I think at times we all understand what it means to feel isolated. And I certainly think we all understand what it means for us to need to have things go right in our worlds, however it is we define what right is, and however we see that unfolding. We need it to go right for us. It is with these common human experiences that we all connect and relate to one another. Dr. Kristen Neff, UT Austin, did some research on self-compassion and how self-compassion contributes to this process. And she actually basically said when things that we think ought not to be happening, in fact do happen to us, rather than seeing them as a unique experience just to us, we're able to step back from that and see it as something that is part of a common human struggle. And then when we can go a step further and apply compassion to that, not in a self-absorbed way, but in a way that takes an objective stance on our difficult experiences, then our perspectives are broadened. Dr. Neff uses her own example for this of parenting an autistic child. And she described watching the other parents play with their children, feeling a little bit jealous, feeling a little bit of self-pity from that. And when she was able to step back and apply some of these principles, she was able to observe and see that all parents have difficulty with their children. And many parents have difficulties that are much worse than what she has with her own children. And it was through this process that she was able to feel more connected to the other parents, not more isolated from them. There's something about connecting with the vulnerabilities of others that brings us to the place where we can feel compassion not only for them, but for ourselves. But it's not always easy to identify with the vulnerabilities of others. In fact, it's pretty difficult, and I would say that's why we don't always do it most of the time. But the outcomes are clear when we do. By channeling thoughts of loving kindness towards groups outside of our own, and yes, even racial, ethnic groups outside of our own, implicit bias towards those groups is measurably decreased. Perhaps as a city, if we were to increase our loving kindness, if we were to increase our self-compassion, our American Indian students might feel less isolated in the educational systems than they have in the past and perhaps to some degree still do in the present. By cultivating greater compassion, we are able to relax the walls of the typical categories into which we segregate ourselves and create genuine connections, genuine perceptions of similarity with individuals outside of our groups. The key is compassion. It is this research that has inspired the Tulsa Human Rights Commission, with the help of the Tulsa Interfaith Alliance, to embark upon a mission to bring Tulsa to being the place to being a city of compassion, a city where diversity is truly celebrated and seen as a strength, a city where intolerant educational systems, race, riots are truly ancient history. Corinne Armstrong wrote a book, 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life, and I highly recommend all of you read this book immediately. If you haven't already, as soon as you can. It's changed my worldview, I think, in some ways. And as part of Armstrong's work is a charter. And the charter is a collaborative effort to bring not only compassionate thinking, but compassionate action to the center of religious, moral, and political life. It is based on the Golden Rule. Do not cause harm to others. Do unto others as you want done to you. Something that seems to be a common denominator among all major world religions and ethical systems. It's something that we can all get on board with. And in fact, 56, I believe, cities globally have indeed declared themselves to be cities of compassion. And the last I checked, 261 more were in the process. Tulsa is on that list. And I recently learned that Oklahoma City is also in the process of becoming a city of compassion. So what does that actually mean? Well, what we are doing as a commission is we have a special task force in place now that is slated with the task of polishing up a declaration of Tulsa as a city of compassion. And then we will be meeting with the mayor, we'll be meeting with the city council, and we're hoping that the discussions will move to ultimately an adoption of the charter as being central to the way that we do business here in Tulsa. And what will that look like? Compassionate cities essentially care. They care about things like homelessness, hunger, immigrant families living in substandard housing, unjust treatment of religious groups, members of the LGBTQ community, and yes, we care very deeply about issues of race and ethnicity. To further describe compassion, I rely on a news story from an online news source covering events in Ferguson just a few months ago. 4 young African-American men set out to defend their friend who was being targeted in the Ferguson riots. Their friend, the owner of a Conoco gas station that had begun to be vandalized, was white. When interviewed, the men said that he had employed them over the years and had helped them out a lot. It was these men's adherence to the Golden Rule, their ability to make connections and see the needs of others outside of racial lines, that demonstrates what it means to be a city of compassion. We in Tulsa are a diverse bunch. We have a few things in common, though. We all want to live in a peaceful and safe environment. We all understand the importance of the Golden Rule. And the research is clear that when we make deliberate efforts to create connections and develop a sense of commonality with those outside of our typical groups like age, race, religion, and yes, racial ethnic background, when we do that and create connections beyond those limits, good things happen. Will you join us in helping to make Tulsa a city of compassion? Thank you.